Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge and our last Blitzkrieg campaign playthrough. Last time out, the Germans started off the offensive with the 18th Volksgrenadier launching an attack which overwhelmed some pickets of the 14th Cavalry Group and swept past the left flank of the 106th U.S. Infantry Division, managed to encircle about half of the division on the Schnee Eifel. So now the activation swings over to the Americans, and we'll take a look and see how they decide to try to react to these developments. And when it comes to deciding which formation the Americans are going to activate, they only have a choice of 8 formations, and one of those, Combat Command B of the 9th Armored Division, is off map currently, and its first activation will consist entirely of being placed in its reinforcement arrival hexes around St. Vith here. Now, of the remaining 7, 4 of them are used, like the 2nd Infantry and 99th Infantry Divisions up here, which means that in order for them to even have a shot at getting some kind of activation on the snafu table, they're going to first have to pass an activation check to see if they qualify for a second activation, which leaves 3 formations that are not currently used and will at least get at least 1 roll on the snafu table. However, 2 of those are the 4th Infantry Division and Combat Command A of 9th Armored, which are way down here on the southern flank in a not yet critical sector. The other unused formation is conveniently the 106th Infantry Division located here in St. Vith. Now, the biggest crisis so far facing the Americans is in fact the trapped battalions here of the 106th on the Schnee Eifel. They need to find a way to get these units out of here and back to where they can start forming a defensive line. One of the issues is they are pretty well trapped because of the being unable to move from a ZOC to a ZOC. It means that for them to move at all, they're actually going to have to attack and push one of the defenders that currently has them zocked in out of their, away from them, to enable them to move on a following activation. Now, there is a voluntary retreat option in which these units can simply announce a voluntary retreat. They will be able to move 3 hexes back towards their headquarters over here, but it will involve flipping them to their unprepared side, as well as taking a step loss for the voluntary retreat. So while that is an option to get them out of here, it may not necessarily be the best option just yet. And so if these guys aren't going to try to just simply run away as fast as they can, the other option the Americans have is to try to cut a way through this encirclement. And the 106th is kind of not very well prepared or positioned for that. The rest of the division that is not surrounded is kind of back here. It is in a prepared defense, which will hamper any attacks that it tries to make, as well as limiting the unit's movement to half movement allowance. So we could always drop the prepared defense for the 106, but that's going to have other repercussions down here in this area, and the Germans have yet to make any moves in this area. So I think what we are going to do, instead of activating the 106th just yet, we do have the 14th Cavalry Group located right in this area. They are also in a vulnerable position, and if we can get them to activate, we'll have to first pass an activation check by rolling a 4 or better. But the idea would be that we'll activate 14th Cav and then have the 32nd Armored Recon Battalion here move up and try to cut a hole here, which will allow at least some of these 106th units then to start escaping on their activation later in the turn. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and do that. We will activate the 14th Cavalry Group. First, let's see if they can pass their activation check. Now, for this activation check, the 14th Cav requires a 4 or better on a single die in order to qualify for a second activation. There are no modifiers to this roll, and we see a 3, which is not good news, but not terribly unexpected. Now, because they failed their reactivation roll, that means the 14th Cavalry Group is done for the turn. And this is an issue that you are going to see probably creep up a couple of times this first turn. But again, I think it is a sign of just how well the BCS works. Without using any special rules, simply using the scenario setups by identifying certain formations as being done, like the 3 regimental formations of the 28th Infantry Division, or used, you're going to limit the American response on this first turn quite a bit, thus simulating or mirroring the slow initial response to the Americans by this big surprise attack. So without having to put any idiot rules into place or some other wonky special rules, in a very clean, simple way, the last Blitzkrieg is able to sort of model the slow initial American reaction, which again, it's another little reason why I like this game quite a bit, and the BCS as well. Now, that is unfortunately it for the American activation, and it's going to switch back now to the Germans, and we'll see which formation they want to follow up the 18th Volksgrenadiers activation with. The Germans are going to keep it right in the same area, and they are going to activate 3rd Fallschirmjäger as their next formation. We'll flip the headquarters over to indicate that it has now been activated. And this is not a very big formation. It's not a very good formation. And what we're primarily going to do is give it a narrow front and have it form sort of a cordon here along the south bank of the Our River to provide some depth between the trapped American battalions and safety to the west. Now, if they happen to do something good along the way, so much the better, but our primary concern with this formation is to really kind of get it out of the way of the bigger and better formations that are going to be leading the attack. And you'll see what I like to do when I'm looking at activating a formation is I will try to identify some boundaries for its area of operations, or its AO, that are easily identifiable on the map. Things like roads, river lines, towns, that sort of thing. And you can see with the 18th Volksgrenadier Division, they ended their activation. Their blob is located right here, which is south of this secondary road. So what we're going to do with the 3rd Fallschirmjäger is this road is going to be the left boundary or southern boundary of the 3rd Fallschirmjäger's AO, and we're going to have the right or northern boundary be the Our River itself. It's a bit of a narrow frontage here, but they're going to be stretched out this way. There's another secondary road that comes along here on the north side of the Our, and we want to keep the 3rd Fallschirmjäger from inadvertently getting in the way of units that'll be able to use that road to better effect than they will. So that's the idea. They may go ahead and try and deal with the 14th Cavalry Group as they kind of advance into this narrow corridor here. But first up, we're going to deal with the preparation phase. Now, the combat trains are on the map, and they are located way back here, and they are actually stacked with the combat trains of the 12th Volksgrenadier, which is the division immediately to their right. So we are going to have some crossing of the streams. But since the trains are on the map and we have a complete MSR, there's really not much to do in the preparation. We are not going to put them into a prepared defense. They're not mixed with anybody, and we're not going to do a recovery activation. So that's going to move us right along to the snafu roll. Now, the 3rd Fallschirmjäger does actually have a fatigue level of 1. So looking at the fatigue modifiers, they're going to get -1 for the fatigue level. They're not mixed, and they're going to get a +1 for the game-specific DRM. They do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They do get the +1 for optimal distance for their trains. They are not ghosted, but they are crossing the streams, so that's going to bring them back down to a net +0. And then finally, you can see along here, the MSR is using tracks. which is going to give them a -1. So overall, it is a net -1 to the snafu roll for 3rd Fallschirmjäger, which means you're going to require an 8 or better on the dice in order to get a full activation. And we got a 2, which is not good, and a 6. Actually, they did it. They got the 8, -1 is 7. So they did get their full activation, which will give them 2 objective markers. And I think we are going to go ahead and place those markers. Since there aren't a lot of Americans in the vicinity here, we're going to go ahead and place the 1st objective marker and the 2nd objective marker right here on top of the 14th Cav headquarters with the light tank companies there, giving them a double tap because that will give them an objective zone out here, which will cover Charlie Squadron here of the 14th Cav. So that being placed, we can now go ahead and begin to move and attack. Actually, before we do that, they have 3 organic artillery points and they have 2 additional assigned, which is going to give them a total of 5 artillery points for this activation. Now it's going to be a matter of just moving and or attacking with the infantry units as we are able. So we'll start, let's see, what is this terrain? All right, that's open terrain. So we'll bring this guy up. He's going to go 1, 2. Actually, no, we're going to, yeah, that's fine. We'll bring this guy 1, 2, 3. And now the 1st of the 9th is going to make an attack against C Squadron of the 18th here at the village of Ofst. They are in some rolling hills terrain. This will be the first combat, I think, that we've actually done. So we'll take a minute and run through this step by step for you. Now we have the attacking unit here. The 1st of the 5th is going to be the assisting unit. You can have 1 battalion can make an attack and it can be assisted by up to 1 other battalion. You're going to add up a series of die roll modifiers for the attacker and defender, subtract the defender's total from the attacker's total, and that's going to be a die roll modifier to a 2d6 roll. So for the attacker, we take our action rating, which is a 2, not very good. First modifier is dual or has appropriate support. And what that means is because this is attacking, it will need to have red support. The 3rd Fallschirmjäger formation has no support of any kind, so it's not going to get that modifier. The MSR is not blocked, so there's no negative modifier. Now for the attacker, they are in the double objective zone, so they'll get the +1 for the double tap. The attacking formation is not in prepared defense. Now, we can spend either 1 or up to 3 points of artillery one of 2 ways. We can spend 1 point in a suppression mission, which will give us a +2 to the attack, or we can choose to use our artillery as a destruction barrage where we will try to kill the steps in the hex, and we can allocate up to 3 points for that. Obviously, the suppression is going to give the attack a better chance of success. However, we're not really interested in that. We'd like to just kill these guys rather than take the ground or push them back. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use 3 of our 5 points in a destruction barrage on the hex. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and resolve the artillery barrage to see if we will need to roll. The armored recon squadron here only has 2 steps. So being in terrain, it will require a 4 or better to get a hit. We'll just roll and see what we get here. We've got a 5 and a 4. 2 hits right off the bat. That's going to do it. That is going to eliminate C Squadron here, which will then obviate the need for any further combat roll. Now, just for those of you unfamiliar with the system, if we had instead decided to execute this as a full-on attack and use just 1 point as artillery suppression, what you would have been looking at would be the attacking die roll modifier would have been 2. It would have been 3 for double tap, 4 for assisted, 6 for the artillery support, and then we would subtract the defender's AR of 4, which gives us a +2. They're not in prepared defense. They don't contain more than 1 unit. There's no hex-side terrain. It is a dual unit in terrain, so that would be another +1 to the defender. So they would have a 5 subtracted from the 6 total. It would have been a 2d6 +1 attack on the combat table, and the Germans would have needed to roll a final result of 7 or better in order to retreat the cavalry unit without loss out of the hex. They would have needed an 11 or better on 2 dice +1 in order to inflict 1 step loss and force a retreat. If they had gotten a 13, so in this case they would have needed snake eyes in order to kill both steps, which is why with a unit that's not very good in the attack, attacking a much more capable unit, but a small unit, it's generally better to go ahead and take those artillery points as destruction barrages rather than suppression. So the destruction barrage worked. The cavalry unit is destroyed. That will allow the attacking unit to enter the hex, and we are on to our next units. Now we've opened up the path here with the zone of control eliminated. This is going to allow the rest of the division to make a little more progress than they otherwise would have. And in fact, we will go ahead and bring this battalion down here for 1, 2, 3 here. And this battalion will make an unassisted attack on the on Manderfeld here. This is going to be, again, this is simply another attempt to kill the American unit in the hex via destruction barrage. I've got no hope of the actual attack working if it gets that far. Let's see if we can zoom in here a little better and you can see what's going on. Now, with this attack, again, it's going to be an unassisted by the 2nd Battalion of the 9th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. There's only a single step in the hex. Now, it is a yellow unit, which indicates it's a hard unit. These are tanks. Historically, I believe these were Stuarts and Scots, the howitzer version of the US M3 tanks. So these are actual tanks, a little bit harder to kill. Going to require a 6 in order to kill them. So this is more than likely going to do nothing more than kill a couple of German infantry steps. But we're going to allocate both of our remaining artillery points in the formation to a destruction barrage. So I will need to roll 2 dice, and if I get a 6 on either one, they will have done their job. If not, things are not looking good for that battalion. And we've got a total of 6, but that's not going to cut it. So the destruction barrage failed to hit. Now we will go ahead and resolve the actual attack. It is a 2. They are not supported. They do get +1 for the double objective zone. They are there's no artillery and there's no assist. That's it. So we're looking at a straight up 3 for the Americans. We're going to, or for the German attackers. The defenders have a 4 action rating. They are not dual. They're not in prepared defense. They are in terrain, which is going to give them +1, and we have hex-side terrain of the river here, which is another +1. So it is a 3 minus 6. It is a net -3 DRM to the attack. And here we go. They rolled a 7. -3 is a 4, which indicates a 2. So the 2nd Battalion will have taken 2 step losses and failed to dislodge the American tanks in Manderfeld. Not a huge loss, and like I said, rather expected, but they were going to take a chance with the artillery and see if they could get lucky like they did in their first attack there. Now we've got a couple more battalions to move up, and 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll go 1, 2, 3 and a half here. here, and we'll slide them in there at the headquarters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll bring them forward to the crossroads here. And that should do it for the first activation for the 3rd Fallschirmjäger. You can see their blob is more of almost a thin line. They did manage to eliminate some of the Americans here, and you can see they're pushing along the south bank of the Our, trying to increase the difficulty of getting these trapped American battalions off of the Schnee Eifel. Now with that, that should be the end of the activation. We'll do some cleanup where we remove any objective markers, any traffic markers, as well as, what do we have? Traffic markers, temporary drop support markers. The combat trains are still at optimal distance, so we don't need to move those. Although I would like to get this MSR shifted, and I would prefer to run south here. The problem is this American battalion is exerting a zone of control onto this secondary road that I would need to use. And for purposes of MSRs, friendly units do not negate enemy zones of control. So until the Germans can clear this hex, that will open up this road, allowing the 3rd Fallschirmjäger to shift their MSR southwards here and clear it out of the way of 12th Volksgrenadier, but that's not going to happen until the next turn at the earliest. So now we will move on to the fatigue roll. We did make 2 attacks, which is a 3 or less to increase fatigue. And we rolled a 2, so their fatigue level is going to increase to fatigue level 2. And now, in order to get a second activation, I will need to roll a 6 or higher on a single die to get a second activation. I don't know if I want to bother with that right now. I think, well, let's just go ahead and make the die, let the die decide. No point in agonizing over it. It is a 4, which means no second activation for 3rd Fallschirmjäger, and they now are done. So with that, we're going to have the activation pass back to the Americans. Back on the American side, the plan to have the 14th Cavalry Group counterattack to cut open an escape path for the battalions on the Schnee Eifel has failed miserably, in no small part due to the fact that 14th Cavalry Group itself was getting overrun by multiple German divisions. And at this point, I think we are going to go ahead and activate the 106th Infantry Division in an attempt to get as many of these guys out of here as we can. If we put it off any longer, the Germans still have the 62nd Volksgrenadier Division, which could make life even more difficult for getting these guys out of there. So rather than activate another used American formation and fail the reactivation check, we'll just go ahead and at least get one roll on the snafu table and see what the 106th can do to save itself. So we'll activate the 106th. The combat trains are on the map and the MSR is complete. And the combat trains for the 106 are located here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hexes back of the headquarters in St. Vith, which means the first decision we need to really make with the 106th is whether we're going to maintain or drop the prepared defense that they are in. Now, if we're going to try to counterattack to break the encirclement here, being in prepared defense is really going to hamper us. In fact, the only 2 units that really have any shot of making any sort of attack from the outside of the encirclement is a very small provisional battalion here and the 81st Engineer Battalion up at Schoenberg. And I don't think the engineers, 1, 2, 3, yeah, the engineers, these 2 would be the only ones to be able to make it, but the prepared defense is going to hamper any attacks we try to make. So if you look at the flip side and say, well, let's drop it and try to attack the Germans here and maybe open up an escape hatch for the guys on the western end of the Schnee Eifel, we have to keep in mind that dropping the prepared defense is going to weaken our ability to hold off any other German formations that are attacking. So I think instead of dropping the prepared defense, we're going to maintain the prepared defense for now, and we will resort to plan B as far as getting these guys off of the Schnee Eifel, or rather trying to get them off of the Schnee Eifel. That's going to bring us up to the snafu roll, and the 106th actually doesn't have that bad a chance of getting a full activation. They have a fatigue level of 0, so they won't get the fresh. They're not coordinated, they're not mixed. There is a -2 game-specific DRM to all American formations on the 16th and 17th, so they're at -2. The trains are at optimal distance, which is a +1, so that brings them to -1. They are not ghosted, and they are not crossing the streams. Neither are they using any tracks. So the 106th actually has only a -1 snafu DRM, and since they're maintaining prepared defense, the best that they can get is a partial anyway. So basically, as long as they roll a 4 or higher on the snafu roll, they'll be able to get some kind of activation in. And they managed to roll a 9 on the snafu roll. So that will give them a partial. That gives them 1 objective marker to place. The question is, are they going to bother placing that objective marker? One of the big problems hampering the 106th is the fact that so much of the division is outside of its command radius. The headquarters has a command radius of 10, as you can see here. However, that is a pretty good command radius, to be honest. Unfortunately, it only reaches out 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 to here. So this hex is in command radius. These 2 hexes are outside of command radius, and everybody on the Schnee Eifel is outside of command radius. So I think what we'll do is to get the units on the Schnee Eifel out of there, there is an option called a voluntary retreat. As long as you get a partial or full snafu result, individual units can conduct a voluntary retreat, which allows them to simply pick up and move 3 hexes in retreat, regardless of zones of control, enemy units, impassable terrain, all that kind of stuff. However, it does cost you 1 step to initiate this voluntary retreat. And if the 3 hex retreat ends in an enemy zone of control, it's going to cost you a 2nd step loss, and that's per unit, not per stack. Now, the easy decision is here for the 1st Battalion of the 423rd on the west end here, because they can, with their 3 hex voluntary retreat, they can make it out of the pocket. You are also, as a result of the voluntary retreat, placed on your move side, which could be a problem because now the action rating has gone from a 2 to a 1, and they are now an unprepared unit, which is going to prohibit them from getting any support or prepared defense benefits, that kind of stuff. However, at this point, they are in Sov-Kipu mode, so they are more concerned with running than actually being able to stand and fight. If we can get a 2nd activation, that will give us an opportunity to place these guys back onto their deployed side. Now, with the other battalion here, they can also, 1, 2, that would put them there. That's there. And so you see how the German encirclement did a good job of preventing most of these guys from escaping from the pocket cleanly. So they're going to go ahead and take their lumps and land here, which will be a 2-step loss for 3rd of the 423rd. The 3rd of the 422nd is also going to try to get out, and they're going to go 1, 2, 3. So they'll make it cleanly here. They only suffer 1 step loss. The 2 battalions on the eastern end, however, have a lot further to go, and I'm inclined to maybe leave these guys in place out here simply because they may do a better job of tying down German units for the next couple of days. kind of similar to what 6th Army at Stalingrad did for the Germans in late 42, early 43. Plus, we have the 2nd Battalion here, which is still exerting a zone of control on this secondary road, which can affect the German plans as well. So these two guys, we're probably going to have to write them off, and hopefully we'll be able to get these three to safety. We're going to also need to address the troops out here. We want to pull them back in, at least within the command radius here, where they can go into prepared defense and actually have a better chance of holding their ground. Now, with the partial result, we only get half movement, but that should be enough for this battalion here as he comes back on the road to Berg Royland on the west side of the Our River. And this battalion can only move here because of the forest terrain costing 2. However, I think we will kind of do a little bit of a chain reaction here. He will come back to Steinebruck, and then that will allow this battalion to deploy 1.5 up to here. And we've at least starting to put some kind of a cordon defense along the river here, hopefully delaying the Germans from getting to St. Vith for another turn or two, and allowing some reinforcements to show up. Now, I don't think we're going to do anything else with that, which means we're moving on to cleanup. We did not place any objective markers. We don't have any traffic or drop support to remove as well, which brings us to fatigue. Now, since the only thing we did is move, we did not do any actions which generate fatigue. Therefore, there will be no fatigue roll for the 106th, and thus guaranteeing us staying at this fatigue level 0. However, we now have to apply isolation effects. For every unit that is outside of command radius during this step of the turn or activation, they will lose 1 step. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So basically we have 1, 2, 3, these 4 battalions will take 1 step loss. And then also any unit without a safe path to the headquarters will lose another step. Since these guys are surrounded by unnegated enemy ZOCs, they will take a 2nd step loss in the isolation phase. Everyone else should have a safe path, because the safe path is going to be a total of 15 hexes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. He's good, so if he's good, they should all be good. All right, so a couple of additional losses on top of the voluntary retreats. It's not pretty. Several of these battalions now are pretty chewed up, but at least there's some chance that this regiment's worth of units will be able to get back into some kind of position here, hopefully in the next activation. So with that, let's see, the 106th requires a 6 to get a 2nd activation. Let's see if they can get reactivated here. Close, it's a 5, which is not quite going to do it. If they were fresh, that would have done it. So that's going to end the 106th activation for the 16th of December. Again, the division is in a pretty rough spot right here because there's still quite a number of German formations yet to go. It may not look that bad to players unfamiliar with the game, but you'll see as this first turn continues, and certainly as we get into the 17th of December, the 106th is very likely to face some hard times here. So with that, I think we will go ahead and I'll end this episode here. We've seen a couple of activations in quite a bit of detail. I wanted to kind of keep the episode going to keep kind of the narrative right here in this 106th area. Actually, before we go real quick, I just wanted to leave you with the current loss and strengths of the Americans as a result of what we saw in this episode. You can see the 106th roster right here. The 422nd and 423rd are the two regiments that were sort of trapped on the Schnee Eifel. You can see the 3rd Battalion, 423rd, is down to only 2 steps remaining. 3rd of the 422nd has lost about half, as well as the 1st Battalion. So they're starting to get chewed up fairly quickly. And the 14th Cavalry Group, you can see the 2 squadrons that were eliminated in this episode. The cavalry tanks at Manderfeld here have only a single step, which will leave them, if this unit gets destroyed, it will leave them with only the 32nd Cavalry Battalion in 4 steps. And that's important because if all of the combat units of a formation are eliminated, that will eliminate the formation from the game permanently. Also, one thing that I did forget to show you in the 106th activation was the 2nd Battalion of the 423rd, which was stationed back up here in Bourne, went ahead and moved down the rail tracks here through St. Vith and is working its way to the east to, again, help form a defensive line there. But I think that should do it for this episode. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.